So welcome to this week's Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Alan Shaw, industrial and biotech entrepreneur, currently CEO and co-founder of Calysta, a mission-driven company founded on the promise of using sustainable feedstock for production of protein. Alan, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh no, it's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see you, Simon.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. So I wanted to take it, I know you've had a long and successful career, so I wanted to kind of take it all the way back to a few years ago as you were kind of growing up. And it was really just to get a sense of, I suppose as you were growing up, what were the kind of formative, key kind of influences on a kind of young Alan Shaw?
Well, I was brought up in the northeast of England. Working class family, hardworking. My parents didn't have any choice. I think that kind of set the tone. I'm a Yorkshireman at heart. Some people think I'm a little bit blunt, but I always tell the truth. I was brought up with a very strong work ethic. I think that goes with that part of the country. And when I came to that crossroads of you can go to work at 16 or you can go to college, it wasn't a crossroads for me. It was you go to work at 16. And so everything that I've done in my life, it's always seemed to have been done the hard way. And I think that has made me the person that I am today. There were no shortcuts for me. And I think if you fast forward to where I am now, I'm onto my fourth company. People don't believe you when you say that, but this is my fourth company, and the other three have all been successful. But I don't believe in shortcuts. I'm here for the long haul. There are no quick fixes. And I think really a lot of that started from a very early age.
Yeah, no, great. But so what got you into kind of chemistry then? And from your family, what did your parents do, as it were? What were their kind of...
Yeah, well, the answer is ICI. In fact, I could say ICI, the answer to the three questions. Both my parents worked at ICI. My father was a fitter. ICI was the number one employer for people in that region. We're talking about the 1970s, the late 1970s, of course. I'm not that old, but you basically,
of course.
Yeah, of course. You basically went where your parents worked, and if you were brought up in Middlesbrough, you either worked for the steel company, or you went to work for ICI. So the chemistry kind of came with the territory. But quite honestly, even from a very young age, I loved dabbling with chemistry. I ended up having more than one chemistry set. And I really always had a very inquisitive mind. My mother used to say, "You're not like your brother, he just wants to go and play football." And my father just wanted to play football. In fact, he played for Borough Boys in the 50s. So I think my brother and my father just expected us to play football, which is, a very aspirational thing in England, as you know, but not me. I wanted to go and change the world. And my mother said, "Well, I don't know where that came from, but you were always a very, very curious child."
No, that's excellent. And would you say, because you did a PhD, right, in chemistry?
Yeah, so like I said, I did it the hard way, but I think it really was formative. I spent 7 years at night school, starting at 16. I did an ONC, a HNC, a bachelor degree, managed to get a 2-1. It was impossible to get a first, by the way, because you're only doing it 2 nights a week and 1 day. My employer was extremely generous. They paid for everything. I really have them to thank for that, even though they don't exist now, as you know. And then I went, and then I basically looked at the world and said, you know what? You started work as a lab technician. You've got your first degree, but you're really still going to be a lab technician. It was very hard to make it to the next management level without actually coming in from outside. And so I left ICI after 7 years and went to do a full-time PhD at Durham University, which was a huge break for me as an individual. I teamed up with a young blood lecturer, Vernon Gibson, who actually now is at Imperial, went on to to do great things, a tremendous PhD supervisor. And he was very helpful to me. 3 years, wrote it up in record time, and then went back to ICI in Manchester, came in at a completely different level, and then I was set to be the CEO of ICI. But of course, history had a different path for me.
No, okay, no, absolutely. History did. So when you went to do the PhD, because it was interesting. So you really, you always came back with that technical and scientific grounding to apply it in the business sense, because that's where you were before, essentially. So how different did it make you, I suppose, when you think about before you went off, you did a PhD, you came back with it, how much more effective were you able to be in your job and your business with the PhD?
Well, you know, Simon, that is a very insightful question, and I think you've just nailed it. I actually think that was the game changer. Well, one of them. But those 7 years, 16 to 23, when I was working with adults in a real job setting, not at college, not boozing every day, and not having all the fun, by the way, that young people are supposed to have. The truth is, I aged. I think it matured me. It made me, I learned how to interact with other people. I learned to respect other people. And I also remember I was working with working class people. I wasn't working with other highfalutin scientists, business people. That came later. So it gave me a grounding in normal life, mainstream life. And of course, if you fast forward now, one of our biggest successes at Calysta is our UK operation, which is at Teesside. And we're actually in the very building that I started working when I was 16 in 1979.
Oh,
It's ironic, I know, but it was my early years and appreciation of how hard people can work in that part of the world, the deep understanding of chemical processes. It just helped me set it up. And so when I think about a company, because I've been going to the heart of your question here, it's really insightful. The hallmark, if you could call it, of the successes over the years is my ability to recognize a technology and a market, but at the same time, recognize what that technology has to look like, going from a science to a technology to be applied and to actually scale up. And if there's one thing that I know you have to be able to do to be successful, is you have to have a technology that scales both economically and sustainably. And I don't mean sustainably in saving the planet. I mean sustainably as in it will operate in January and it will operate in December and it will operate 5 years later. It's got to be real. It can't just be a lab experiment, something some VC dreamt up, some pump and dump story. It's got to be real and it's got to work at scale. And that, I think, comes from that very early grounding that I had in industrial chemistry.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you for that. That's really interesting. It must be so nostalgic to be back there where it all kind of, it all started with you. It really is. It's a great, there is a great sense of irony with that when you think about the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I'm interested as well, before you went out and founded kind of Codexis, you had 20 years, it looks like, broadly working across the chemicals kind of industry, as it were, in a number of different roles. I suppose when you look back at that time, maybe just, is there either a job or a project that you look back fondly on, or was kind of influential in helping you up where you are now, for instance, from those formative?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier, I've actually been involved in 4 successful companies. Codexis was number 3, and clearly it's a hugely successful company. It's worth over $1 billion, I think $1.5 billion as of yesterday. And I believe Calysta, which is my 4th company, will be even more successful. But the journey started for me when I left ICI. I went to ICI and we did a spin out within ICI, ICI Fine Chemicals. I was working with the startup team there. I was still very young. I don't take credit for any of that. I was learning at the time. But then I went to Science in Cambridge, And that was really a very significant move for me, because I left ICI after 14 years. And I basically said, you know what, startups, they're doing crazy stuff down in Cambridge. I'd always worked in the north of England, and I met an entrepreneur called Chris Evans, the father of UK biotech, as he was called at the time. Kyra Science was the company. It was the second UK public biotech company. Those were heady days in the mid-90s. The dot-com was raging in the US. And Chris Evans was looking at biology and biocatalysis for the very first time. I mean, this is really early days for biocatalysis, and systems biology didn't even exist then. And we worked on a project called minus lactam. Now, minus lactam was an intermediate that we developed and scaled and sold to GlaxoSmithKline as a critical chiral building block for an antiviral anti-AIDS drug called abacavir. Classical chemistry, it took 12 steps of chemistry to produce. But we developed a bioresolution using an enzyme that we got out of a pond in someone's back garden. Now, I'm telling you, this was heady days. And I was a chemist, and it completely turned me into a biologist. One minute I'm a chemist, the next minute I want to be a biologist. And it really taught me the power of biology, because we reduced that 12 steps to 6. And we were the sole supplier to GlaxoSmithKline, Glaxo Wellcome as was, and they were able to launch the product on the back of a secure supply chain. We outsourced it because we were a technology platform company to a UK chemical manufacturer in Yorkshire. And this was my first company. We then spun it out, Chirotech, and we then ended up selling it to Dow Chemicals. Very successful trade sale built on the back of a product that had a 70% gross margin product. It was a chiral intermediate, it was very pure, and it was produced via a bioresolution. That taught me the power of biology. And then I went to Alchemica, BTP Alchemica in Manchester. We then sold that company to Clariant. A year later, I developed a spin-out company there called Clariant Life Science Molecules. Again, we built it around this belief I had that biology was going to fundamentally change chemistry. And by the way, there weren't many people like me in the 1990s saying biology was going to change chemistry. It wasn't what you have in Silicon Valley now. There wasn't any of the companies that we have now. And Codexis was not even a twinkle in my eye back then. And then I met some guys from Maxigen who were based in Redwood City in California. And then I came out to the States in 2001. And with that knowledge of minus lactam and recognizing the amazing technology that Maxigen had that came out of Francis Arnold and Pim Stemmer. So, I mean, tremendous pedigree. One of the first, by the way, Maxigen was absolutely the first. They were the winner in that space with molecular evolution technology. That's when I teamed up with Laurie Giver, who's still with me today, working with her for 20 years, one of the most brilliant biologists in the world. Hadn't even met Josh Silverman at this time, and yet he was working closely with Pim Stemmer at another Maxigen spin-out. And we kind of formed what I called the dream team. And that was when I really kicked into gear as an entrepreneur. You know, I believe in biology. Can you guys actually do this? And then we worked on a Lipitor intermediate, hydroxynitrile, world's biggest selling drug, torvastatin, 4,000-fold improvement in productivity from virtually nothing. And all of a sudden, wow. And we literally created biocatalysis. Codexis was nothing. It was my idea. And then it's now the world's leading biocatalysis company. It started in pharmaceuticals. It's gone full circle and gone back into pharmaceuticals. The tremendously successful journey took 10 years before we IPO'd that company. And the hallmarks of that company and the hallmarks of Calysta are you build solid foundations, no quick fixes, no quick shortcuts. You've got to be sure that you're building on rock and not sand. You've got to have the right team around you. And you've got to know that you've got something that can scale. We'll come back to Calysta later in the interview, but those two opportunities, Glaxo's Abacavir and Pfizer's atorvastatin, both focused on biocatalysis, really taught me the power of biology, and you could argue the rest is history.
Oh, it's fantastic. But it must have been at the time, the technology stack and the potential for biology was clearly evolving hugely in terms of what was available to you, no doubt, you know, and around that time as well, I would have thought.
Well, it's not now. I mean, look, there are companies now that are doing what we did 20 years ago, but the difference was 20 years ago, we were flying a kite. We were flying by the seat of our pants. You had to have vision. I mean, this is the difference. This is what you have to be able to do when you're an entrepreneur. You have to be brave. You have to have conviction. You've got to be able to convince everybody else that you're not crazy. You've got to bring everybody along with you. You know, you can't go charging over the hill and look around and say, "Come on, guy," and everybody's like, they've stepped one, they've gone backwards and you've gone forward. It's like back in those days, we were really breaking new ground. Of course, tremendously exciting. I mean, that's why I do what I do. I mean, you could argue after 3 successful companies, why would you do a 4th? But I just absolutely love what I do. And it's that excitement of doing something for the first time, operating a completely new area, and then the satisfaction you get when it actually works. And like when I'm ringing that bell, the NASDAQ,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, it wasn't the money. It was, I've changed people's lives. I've created a company, and it's a real company. And Codexis is real today, and that was in 2012. It didn't disappear. It wasn't like something that just disappeared. It's a real company. I'm tremendously proud of what we did at Codexis.
Oh, absolutely. Tell me, how much of all the journey with biology, for instance, how much was it around, you know, spending your whole career in chemicals, for instance, how much was it around, you know, the power of biology to really influence and change the environment, for instance? When did that become a narrative for you?
Yeah. Well, we won a Green Chemistry Award for the atorvastatin work at Codexis. So you could argue that was the first affirmation of it. And I think we won quite a few. We ended up with needing a new trophy cabinet. It was a bit of a joke after a while. I mean, the company was breaking new ground in what they call the Presidential Green Chemistry Awards. And I think we won quite a few. Of course, when you're reducing chemical steps, by very nature, you're reducing the loading, right, on nature and the loading on the environment. But what really turned me to biology was the preciseness, the exactness. So 2 things. Very important question you've just asked. Why did we even care? Biological catalysts give you very pure products. Chemocatalysts didn't at the time. So think about your body, think about all the receptors. You know, this goes back to thalidomide. You know, thalidomide was caused by a misunderstanding, or actually not knowing. People didn't even understand chirality at the time. And that was a phenomenon that really became a business tool, almost like a semi-industry within an industry in the 80s, which I leveraged to, you know, fairly good results at Chiroscience. That's where the term comes from, Chiroscience. That the company was based on chirality. But thalidomide was a chiral drug, and people didn't realize that half of it was devastatingly destructive to the body, and the other half was doing what they hoped it was doing. So you have to have very, very pure products, and biology can do that. Chemo can't. But the other thing is, and this is very important, when you're developing a chemical process, when you're using a chemocatalyst, let's say ruthenium or a rhodium catalyst, classical hydrogenation sort of catalyst, you develop the chemical process around the catalyst. The catalyst is fixed. With biology, it's the complete opposite. You can say, what is the best way for me to make this product? And then you design the catalyst to suit the process. Can you imagine how valuable, how important, how transformative that statement is? We built Codexis on the back of being able to literally say, no, we can change the way you think about chemistry. Tell me how you'd like to make this, and we'll develop a catalyst to suit that process. That created billions of dollars of value.
Great. No, okay, I see that. That's a real transformation in chemicals and chemical process, really, isn't it? What you've done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But what about the, like for instance, now with Calysta, it's really interesting. There's so much, interest and activity in alternative protein, right? Investment and different forms. You guys are pretty early with this, right? So, in terms of the business and, give me some rationale in terms of when what you saw back then, as it were, in order to really want to stamp your mark and create a kind of technology and a business which was going to produce what you're producing now, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so this is enter stage right. My very good friend Josh Silverman, who is quite possibly one of those brilliant scientists I've ever had the honor of working with, and that's notwithstanding the comments I made about Laurie Giver, who heads up our innovation team at Calysta. But we were coming out of, Laurie and I were coming out of the renewables, the whole biofuel thing, which, as you know, was, not to put too fine a point on it, was somewhat of a bit of a disaster for many people. Billions of dollars across many companies chasing what was really a mandate. The US government was pushing the renewable fuel standard. Companies like Royal Dutch Shell said, hey, we've got to do something about this. It's going to be a mandate. We have to do it. And Codexis teamed up with Royal Dutch Shell in what was, I think, the largest privately funded biofuel program in the world. I mean, it was hundreds of millions of dollars focused on second generation, or as they call it, cellulosic ethanol. If you think about it, what we were trying to do was a little bit crazy. There's a reason why trees stand up. Cellulase is strong. If cellulase was weak and easily decomposed, the trees would be lying on the ground. There wouldn't be trees. So nature evolved cellulase to be pretty tough. And yet here we were thinking that we could actually break that down, turn it into soluble sugars so you could ferment it into ethanol. The truth is it didn't really work. And that was, again, one of the big learnings for me. Big learnings. Two things wrong with that story. It was built on a premise that the feedstock was going to be readily available, free, and renewable. The truth is it only ended up being one of those, and it was the one that no one paid you for, the renewable. It wasn't free, because the golden rule is nothing's free if more than one person wants it. And it absolutely wasn't available because there was no infrastructure to collect biomass, because no one had bothered to use it before. So, there were some studies done very early on about, concentric circles showing, well, if we do a biorefinery here and we need hundreds, thousands, millions of tons of biomass, how many miles out do we have to go? By the time you worked out the unit economics of aggregating all that feedstock, project was dead on arrival. That's when I learned about the power of feedstock and how if you don't get the fundamentals right, you don't have a scalable technology. It can work in the lab, but who cares about that? So I met up with Josh Silverman, and Josh was telling me that he had brilliant idea, by the way. I give him full credit for it. He had the idea of using these methanotrophs to convert methane, natural gas, which is primarily methane, into chemicals. The single cell protein came later. That actually wasn't Josh's idea. That was my idea, but that comes from my relationship with ICI and the Protein Project back in the 1980s. I'll say a bit more about that later. Josh's original idea, because this was really a marriage of just, Josh and I just came together perfectly. It's a very good example of yin and yang. Josh was brilliant in that he said methane, methanotroph into chemicals. He wanted to do what people had tried to do with biomass, but instead of it being a readily unavailable and relatively expensive feedstock, he actually found one that was absolutely readily available. It was piped everywhere. The infrastructure already existed and was cheap. And so I said, well, you know what? I can help you with this, Josh. I know something about building great companies. I don't need to second guess you on the science, but I can bring in some people and do what I do. And that's what we did. And we formed this company called Calysta Energy. Now, 2 years later, there was a hallelujah moment, as people say in America. It was really the lights turning on. And I sat with Josh and I said, you know what, Josh, this is going to be a long haul. I don't think the Mephanotros want to make butanol as easily as we'd like. I don't think they want to make, whatever it was we were working on, isopropanol or propane. It doesn't matter what it was. We're working on a whole platform. And I said, but you know what? We've already started. We've already raised our Series A round, and we've got some really smart people here, and we must be able to do something with this because we're the first. I said, is anybody else looking at Mephanotros? No. Has anyone else developed all the tools to be able to actually figure out what we're doing with the Mephanotros? And Josh said, no, we're the only people in the world and we've got patents on it now. And I said, this is really valuable. Let's do something. And then actually together we were talking, and I remember the protein project back in the 80s in Teesside, which was a methanol fermentation. ICI built the world's largest fermenter to produce a product called protein for chicken feed. And I said, Josh, what about just stopping at the protein itself? Let's not bother to GMO it. Let's just work with the natural organism. I said, has anyone done that? And he said, well, I don't know. So we dug deep. We discovered, it's amazing, this story, by the way. I try and we discovered that the Norwegians, Statoil, one of the world's largest, most respected engineering and oil and gas companies, had formed a joint venture with DuPont back in the 1990s, early 2000s, called Norfirm. And they'd actually done the very thing that Josh and I had hypothesized. They had taken a methanotrope, naturally occurring, because they had some cheap natural gas, stranded gas opportunity. And of course, people cared about salmon feed in Norway, second largest contributor to GDP. I said to Josh, we've got to find out what they did. I phoned up some old friends at ICI, found out what happened to protein, made a lot of phone calls. Josh and I flew to Norway. I came back a few months later. We acquired the company, we acquired the technology, and we did a complete turn, pivot, as they call it, changed the company's name to Calysta and focused almost exclusively on the single-cell protein product. And in the last 6 years, we've been working incredibly hard in building what I now believe will be a hugely successful company. We've taken that process and we now have a process that we can scale to industrially scale it. We're building our first world-scale plant in China. Josh had to leave the company eventually because what we didn't need was a chief scientist. Josh knew that we were building an industrial company, a company that was producing real product, and that's not what he's good at. He went on to do his own thing, and I wished him every success. And we needed to bring in an industrialist, a technologist, and we have a chief technology officer who used to work for Quorn, who actually understands fermentations in the real world. And to be honest with you, that's one of the things that I know you have to do. And it's not always a nice thing to do. But the team that you start with on day one in a company is invariably not the same team that you have, when you exit for a couple of $1 billion, whether it's an IPO or a SPAC or a trade sale. And as CEO, you have to know that you've got to go through these gates. There are many, many different forms a company has to take through that journey. And one of the things I think I'm pretty good at is understanding that now, having done it 3 times already. And it's all about getting the right people on the bus. And actually, sometimes you've got to get people off the bus who were the right people 3 or 4 years earlier, but now their skills are not that relevant. And you can actually say, look, you're a Series A guy, you can go and start a company somewhere else, you'd be much happier. Everybody's a winner if you can just be honest with people. And, there's no room for emotion. You have to be, the company must always come first, and you've always got to know where you're going and you've always got to be 2-3 years ahead in that journey. So you're making the right decisions at the right time.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's funny, I had Josh on as a guest not so long ago, and I loved my conversation with him. And I could really, I'm picturing the synergy with you guys and how that would have worked, and the coming together and the yin and the yang, basically. And absolutely. And I just love talking with him now, for instance, and understanding some of those deep technical challenges. And he is just like it's great talking with him. I love the way he explains things as well. He's
yeah. Well, I've never, like I said, I've always been incredibly honest, because it's the only way. It's the way I was brought up. When people say to me, what's your secret of success? I don't say, well, I'm a brilliant scientist and I had this idea and I built a company around it. What I do say is I teamed up, or I heard a great idea and I teamed up with the person who had that idea and we built a great company around it. And that's what I do, right? I can recognize a technology opportunity, recognize a market opportunity, and I can bring the two together. Now, 90% of the time, people who try to do that fail, actually. It's the odds of success are really against you. Most startups fail. But I'm incredibly patient, very tenacious. Like I said, I'm in for the long haul. These things don't take 2 years, they take 10 years. You've got to get everything right. And I'm able to also identify who we need. Like I said to Laurie, we need someone now who's able to do that. We went and found that person, and we need to be able to do that. And if we're going to take it to the next level, we've got. And I've done some bolt-on acquisitions. Codexis had 2 acquisitions before we IPO'd the company. So there are many ways to build great companies, but it is largely about people. It really is about getting. And so one of the things that I like to say to younger people who are coming up through the ranks, the CEOs or entrepreneurs of tomorrow, is I say, look, you probably get told that you've got to be the smartest person in the room. And take it from me, that's wrong. What you have to do is you have to be able to recognize who is the smartest person in the room. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. And I would figure as well, a business like Calysta, it becomes so multidisciplinary, isn't it? Right? Engineering, you've got biology, you've got chemistry, you've got, it's just the challenges are probably in building a company like that now. It's having all those parts talking to each other, I would have thought, kind of as effective.
I was talking to, I'm not going to mention any names because I just don't do that. Well, not anymore. I might have when I was younger. I was talking to a CEO of another single cell protein company. He's much younger, much earlier on in terms of their development. They've got years of hard work ahead of them. And I said, if we hadn't acquired the technology from Statoil, we wouldn't even be close to building a plant. I said, we're like easily 10 years ahead of you and other people. And I wasn't being rude. I was telling the truth. I know how much work they have to do. He didn't even know that he has the work to do because he's never done it before. And I remember the reaction. He says, no, our technology can scale. That's not a problem. And it was like, well, okay. It's like, I don't think so. So it's not. I'm quite serious about this stuff. People don't know what they don't know, and I'm constantly reminding myself and my own people of that. You don't know what you don't know, and it doesn't matter how smart you think you are. You still don't know what you don't know, and you need to surround yourself by the smartest people you can. And I have to tell you, this is absolutely what we've done. We did it at Codexis. And I've done it at Calysta, but like on steroids. I've got one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, Thomas Hewitt, Chief Operating Officer. We are so lucky to have him. Jeff Bryan, the CTO who joined us from Quorn. We've got Laurie Giver. I mean, it's like a very, very strong team. Very strong team.
And it's a good guy. I like Thomas. Nice chap. Yeah.
And it is the team. And the trick is making them work as a team. 2 + 2 has got to equal 6. 2 + 2 = 4. It's not, what's the point having smart people? You've got to make them do better. So, the C-suite, we really drive, but we're making so much progress now because we're really clicking and we all complement each other. And you can only do that when you've done it before and you know what needs to be done. And you said interdisciplinary, but if you don't know how those pieces fit together, it's very, very hard to get that right. And of course, you know, you can get the wrong person and you don't even know it. And that's like going up a blind alley. You can recruit someone, 2 years later, you realize then they're not a good fit. You've got to come all the way back again. So getting the right team is top of my list of things you have to do if you want to build great companies. Getting people motivated, getting people focused, and then quite honestly, get out their way. Surround yourself by people smarter than yourself, and then just step back and let them get on with it.
Yeah, no, great. Absolutely. Tell me, so where are you on the journey right now in terms of the scale up and the you said you're building a commercial plant, right?
Oh,
and,
we're to be honest with you, we're closer to the finishing line than we are the beginning now. Josh and I started this thing back in 2013. It really became Calysta only in 2014, 2015. We did so we've had the Statoil technology for the best part of 6 years, with the pilot plant in Teesside's been operating for 3 years. You know, we've taken our time. We've raised 160 million. We're actually in the market, just closing the financing as we speak. There'll be some news on that coming shortly. We've got tremendously strong shareholders, BP, Mitsui, Adizio, the partnership with Adizio. I mean, they're one of the world's largest nutrition companies. They're majority owned by ChemChina, and they're making it so much easier for us to build this first world scale plant. So yeah, where are we? We are literally building as we speak. We broke ground in January. We're building the first world scale plant, 20,000 metric tons. As soon as it's built, we'll expand it in China. The Chinese government are very, very keen. Food security is a massive issue there. Aquaculture is huge in China. 50% of global aquaculture is China itself. Southeast Asia is our #1 target market, with primarily the shrimp industry. And our lead product, feed kind, will be produced at that plant. It's a 50-50 joint venture with Adizio. We've got channel, we've got distribution, we've got access to world scale engineering, we've got gas contracts. I mean, everything that you need to have in place for you to be able to say, yes, we are real. We are building a real plant. It is going to work, and we're going to make money. And look, here's the bottom line. You talked about single cell protein. Yes, there are many, many companies who jumped on this bandwagon. And quite honestly, I would like them all to be successful. A rising tide raises all boats, because we need more people to be making single cell protein. So it becomes more of a mainstay option to animal protein and vegetable protein. We believe it is the third leg of the protein stool. I want all these companies to be successful. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are ahead of themselves. They're talking up what they're doing, and we've got to be careful. What the industry needs is success. One success will lead to many successes. Fortunately, we will get our plant built. We are first to market. We will be first to market. I believe we're best in class. And the reason for that is because of the feedstock. And I mentioned this to you earlier. We take natural gas and we don't have to do anything with it. Don't have to clean it. Don't have to purify it. Don't have to concentrate it. We just take it as is. Now, there's an old saying in the chemical industry, and I learned this the hard way. Every time you touch a chemical process, you go from 2 steps to 3 or 3 to 4, you essentially double your costs. That's how you kill a process. You don't make any money. We can take a feedstock that is fungible, comes straight out of a pipeline, doesn't matter where it is in the world, put it straight into the fermenter. There's a lot of people talking about making protein from air. Have you heard this phrase?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
It's not even real. It's not air. They're talking about making protein from carbon dioxide, which happens to be 365 parts per million in air. So what is the other 99.5% doing? Something wrong with that story. What they have to do is concentrate the CO2. That's going to cost money. So a lot of people are talking up very exciting stories, but the truth is the core technology, the industrialization of it, the scalability, there's a lot of work to be done. And I would have some serious questions about how are you going to scale that up and how does it actually work in real time? And when you build 100,000 ton plant, what's that actually look like? You see, it all looks easy in the lab. It all looks easy on paper. The reason why I teamed up with Josh was I could see very early on that this was something that could scale. That was before we even knew Statoil had actually done it.
Yeah, no, amazing. And tell me, in terms of other products that you're bringing to market, do you have something in the pipeline for human nutrition as well? Is that a play for you, or is most of the focus into the kind of aquaculture and animal nutrition kind of marketplaces?
Well, it's kind of a yes and yes, so you've got to look at a time frame. Look, we're developing protein. Our product is protein, very high purity protein, by the way, and it's called a dense protein. It's 70 to 74% protein with all the essential amino acids. So it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're in the feed industry or the food industry, you're going to look at that and say, that's got to have value. Yeah. It has huge value. 100,000 ton plant producing that base protein. You can build that on, let's say, the land that would be like 8 football or soccer fields, as they say in America. You can visualize that. That's not very big. If that was a soy plantation producing the same amount of protein, the land use would be the size of Chicago.
Wow.
And so what we're really doing here is we're really going to make a difference. This is going to move the needle. 100,000 ton feed kind plant produces enough dense protein, whether it goes into animal feed or human food, that would be the equivalent of arable land that would use huge amounts of energy and water to produce soy. We use 0 arable land and virtually no water. And that's why we've got massive sustainability criteria. And it's a very, very strong story from a land and water use. And more importantly, it does scale, and it can scale, and we can make money. Now, we're starting with animal feed. We're already approved for sale. And our first plant, 100%, will be feed kind targeted at aquaculture. But yes, we have aspirations. We have a business plan, 10-year plan, showing how we can go from animal feed through pet food all the way to human food ingredients.
Sounds great. Sounds very exciting. Sorry. It sounds like well, you got the next 10 years sorted, it sounds like to me.
Well, whether I'll be running the company for 10 years, I stand by what I said. You know, it's the right person for the right job at the right time. It's fantastic, and my job is to get this company to the point that it's fully financed. I'd like to think, you know, I mean, we could be IPOing or something within a couple of years. It's hugely exciting for the employees, for our investors. And you're absolutely right. There's no restriction on the market opportunity. So this company could just keep building plants, and 10 years from now, yes, you're right, where there could be 1 million tons of feed kind being produced. Whether that's an independent Calysta, whether it's being acquired by one of the large food, it doesn't matter. My job is to build a real company that's sustainable, that will survive regardless of who the owners are. And it's all about, does the technology scale? Are you going to make money? And do the investors get a return on their investment? I know it's not simple, and actually building companies is incredibly hard, but my golden rules are keep it simple.
Yeah, Alan, listen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on, sparing the time, and sharing all that you've had. It's been a great conversation.
Great. Well, it's always nice to see you, Simon. A pleasure.